From basic scoring systems that are widely misunderstood to little details that most fans miss, here are a bunch of UFC rules that most fans have no idea about. Okay, let's just get a big one out of the way. The scoring systems in MMA are a constant source of debate, but even now, years into the usage of the unified rules, it seems like even fighters and commentators have no idea what they're looking for. Sure, most fans have some blind spots when it comes to scoring fights, but you hear guys like Rogan and DC giving rounds to fighters to octagon control, takedowns landed, or even volume striking. And sometimes these things can be useful, but more often than not, damage is the only thing that comes into play. Octagon control was a major buzzword in MMA a few years back, where the guy who was pressing the action and controlling the center of the cage would get that preferential treatment in the eyes of the judges. But that's not how fights are scored these days. Damage is the first criteria looked at. If fighter 1 lands 30 pitter-patter soft punches and the other guy comes in and blasts him with 5 massive shots in quick succession, if the damage done tips in his way, he won that round. But it's not just scoring that causes a lot of confusion. We all know about the punches to the back of the head rule, where sometimes in a ground and pound sequence, a fighter will get warned by the ref or even punished for landing a shot or two behind the head. But here's what people don't understand. The back of the head punching rule does not apply in a wild flurry on the feet. If someone throws a spinning back fist and gets caught with a hard punch, that's on them. The same thing can be said for kicks. Take Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, for example. He loves throwing those wild question mark kicks that wrap around the side of his opponent's head. He scored a legendary KO with this technique in his debut. Sometimes you see fans who jump up from their chairs and criticize a fighter for landing a roundhouse or even a spinning kick to the back of their opponent's head. But all that is a major misreading of the rules. The laws about back-of-the-head shots only apply when the opponent is able to stop themselves from landing there, like in a postured up ground and pound shot. But from one misreading of a rule, we go to a rule that most people don't know about. Did you realize that you can't specifically target an opponent's spine for ground and pound shots? Like any of the other no-go zones, if it happens on the feet, it happens. But in any ground fighting situations, striking the opponent's spine is totally illegal. And how about this next one? We all know you can use arm bars, knee bars, leg locks, and all types of subs to crank on your adversary's limbs in ways that they should not be cranked. But did you know that attacking your opponent's digits, their fingers, toes, it's all illegal in the fight game? That's why there are no finger bars or toe locks. Although, now that we mention it, the toe hold is a submission that attacks the ankle in BJJ. But it's not an actual attack on the individual toes. Moving on from there, though there are a few moves you can see in MMA that are found in pro wrestling, don't expect to see any of your favorite fighters using the tombstone piledriver anytime soon. Spiking your opponent directly down on their head is totally illegal. Any slam that flips them onto their head and risks injuring their neck, yeah, you can't do it. We've seen examples in MMA that got pretty close to breaking this rule, but risking paralysis makes the idea of even attempting to do this a pretty dirty move. Another move that some might consider dirty in the moment, but it's actually totally legal, is the knee to the body of a downed opponent. When you have your opponent on the mat, or in this case, up against the cage, towing the line between a legal knee and a fight-ending illegal shot can be tough. But the best guys in this sport know how to time knees to the solar plexus perfectly. We've seen Anderson Silva, Demetrius Johnson, and Henry Cejudo use this move, catching their opponent with a risky shot to the chest as they try to stand up. And it looks very, very nasty, don't get us wrong. But every time someone lands a perfectly timed grounded knee like this, there's always some group of fans that have no idea just how legal it is. Some argue that knees on the ground should be totally allowed in the UFC. And in organizations like Pride, and these days, One Championship, you can knee your opponent whenever you like. Guys like Aljamain Sterling, who are experts at using this rule to their advantage, would likely be left with a major hole in their game if this rule was ever taken away. But let's move on to another rule that we're sure 90% of you don't know about. You all know that MMA sets itself apart from boxing and bare-knuckle boxing by the 4-ounce gloves it uses. Boxers will generally use 10-ounce or 12-ounce gloves. Bare-knucklers obviously wear nothing, and if you're signed up for a UFC bout, you're getting a pair of 4-ounce gloves. No ifs, ands, or buts. Here's the interesting part though. You have to wear the gloves, sure, but there's nothing in the rules about wrapping your hands. So if you're a guy like Gunnar Nelson, who wants to feel everything on a more visceral level, you can refuse the option of wrapping your hands under those gloves. As soon as Nelson realized it wasn't in the rules, he never wrapped his hands again. Seems bizarre, right? But it clearly works for him. He says it makes him more efficient with his punch selection, and in the grappling, it gives him a better level of feel. Here's a more recent rule change you might not be aware of. Over the last year or so, Dana White and the UFC brought in a rule that prohibited fighters from walking to the cage with their national flag on their back. This was, of course, done because of the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And in the UFC's eyes, it probably made more sense to ban all flags than risk generating controversy. It's a little weird, we gotta admit. And when Dana himself was asked about it, he gave a very deflective answer. But let's return to the rules that govern the actual fighting. We all know what it feels like to be disappointed by a contest. Whether it's a blockbuster title fight that fails to live up to expectations, or a prelim snooze fest you just cannot wait to be over, a dud fight can really take the momentum out of the card. But here's something you might not know, though it very rarely ever happens. Referees have the power to punish fighters for a little thing called timidity. You don't see it often, but if a fighter is very clearly trying to avoid contact, or literally running away without any form of engagement over a long period, that referee can call the fight off entirely on the grounds of timidity. It's not going to come into effect for any old snoozer, but if you're fighting timid and you don't want to be there, the ref might just give you a way out. Here's another interesting piece of trivia. You know sometimes when you see a fighter land a shot way after the bell, and you think to yourself, what a bad sport. Well, sometimes that's illegal, sure. But if the ref is slow to react to the bell, the fighters themselves are under no obligation to stop if the ref misses his mark. Sure, it's not a great look, but it ain't illegal. And while we're on that subject, here's a funny one to leave things off on. We all know that the referee will deduct a point for the most serious fouls. But usually, unless it's very bad, the ref will give a warning or two first. That might sound fair, but it actually creates the biggest loophole in the game. The fact that you can be warned with zero consequences opens the door for some fighters to get one or even more free fouls before anything happens. Yoel Romero and John Jones obviously know this better than most. There's a major gray area between losing a point and the ref doing absolutely nothing. And you'd best believe that some of these fighters are throwing out eye pokes, grabbing the fence, and committing other fouls simply because they can. From illegal strikes and submissions to ways you can bend the rules to your favor, these were the UFC rules that most fans had no idea about.